Buongiorno.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to this conference that I think will be very interesting and exciting for all of us. We want to recall an extraordinary event 50 years ago, the first landing of man on the moon. The title of this year's meeting makes reference to something which is deeply connected with what we're going to discuss this afternoon. Your name was born from what you gazed upon. If there's something that man has been gazing upon since prehistory, is the sky. Man has become self-aware by looking at the sky, under the stars. And in the sky, there's something which, more than anything else, has caught the attention of prehistoric man, as in the moon. The moon with its light, strange and mysterious shape, which constantly changes over the time. There's archaeological remains showing that the Cro-Magnon man, more than 30,000 years ago, was carefully looking at the sky and could acknowledge that the moon has a regular cycle. So, with a gaze full of wonder of prehistoric man, after a long time, has led some men, some of us, representatives of mankind, to travel to the moon, to walk on the moon and to come back safe and sound, which is impressive if you think about it. This has really changed the perception of ourselves forever, ourselves as inhabitants of our planet and the universe. That happened on the 20th of July, 1969, with the mission Apollo 11, when Neil Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon, and their colleague, Mike Collins, was waiting for them alone in the moon orbit to go back. In the meantime, over the past 50 years, many things have changed, and today we will have the opportunity to talk about this. On the one hand, for the past 20 years, the International Space Station has welcomed, hosted many astronauts who have been living there for 20 years in order to carry out scientific experiments. On the other end, the exploration by robots has made us land not only on the moon, but on Venus, Mars, Titanus, which is one of Saturn's satellites, and even on one comet. And we arrived at the borders of the solar system to explore them through robots. Well, today we have with us two protagonists of this exploration journey, space exploration journey. They are two friends and two guests whose profile is known worldwide, and I want to thank them because they have come back to the meeting. It's not the first time for them, so thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to introduce them, although they don't need any introduction because they're very well known. Paolo Nespoli, is an example of the Italian excellence worldwide, astronaut and engineer. Right after high school, Paolo was in the parachuting troops in the military service. Then he left the army to get a degree in space engineering in New York. Then he worked as engineer in Italy and Germany for 8 years before being selected by the Italian Space Agency as astronaut. In his 20 years of being an astronaut, he worked 3 times in space. The first time in 2007 with the space shuttle owned by NASA for a 15-day mission to build the space station. The second time, he worked between 2010 and 2011 with the Russian spaceship Soyuz, with a mission that lasted 159 days in the space station. And the third one in 2017, he was once again in the space station for 139 days. During the missions, he carried out a lot of scientific experiments, and he stayed in space as an alien, as he likes saying, for a total of 313 days in space. Thank you very much, Paolo, for being with us. And then we have with us Roberto Battiston. He was president of the Italian Space Agency from 2014 to 2018. He's one of the most distinguished figures worldwide in the space field. He's a scientist, is a full professor of experimental physics at the University of Trento. He studied at the Normale in Pisa and then in Paris. And his main field of research is fundamental physics. He carries out experiments on accelerators of particles, and he also works in the space field by studying cosmic rays. He's one of the leading experts worldwide. Together with the Nobel laureate Samuel team, he coordinated an experiment on board of the Italian space station, and he coordinated an experiment in order to study the dark matter. Roberto really gave new momentum to our Italian Space Agency, and Italy has become once again one of the leading countries in the space field thanks to his work. Thank you, Roberto, for being with us. Right. Let's start our dialogue and debate. Now, we are talking about an event that took place 50 years ago. 50 years ago, the three of us were quite young. We were about 10, 12. And there's people of our age here in the audience. So, at that age, maybe you already have a memory, something that struck you. Yes. Yeah. What I was struck by was the space missions by these astronauts. They were defined impossible to make something possible. In July 1969, I come from the region, the Italian region of Lombardy, in the north of Italy. Rarely would we travel from there. We were just going away on holiday. And at that time, I was in a summer camp in Cattolica, near here. And I still remember my parents who came to visit me, and they told me, they said to me, tonight we need to go and see the landing on the moon. And I couldn't really grasp the importance of this extraordinary event. To me, that was quite normal. And I understood that it was an extraordinary event, first of all, because it was hard enough to find a place to go to. At that time, it was not very easy to find a television in a restaurant or a bar. And I've seen that it was an extraordinary event through the eyes of the elderly who were watching with wonder. And then I told myself, well, this is so extraordinary that when I'm going to grow up, I'll be an astronaut. Do you remember something, Roberto? I was about 12 years old at that time. I remember a television, which was a sort of toy compared to today's televisions. It was a black and white TV. And there was the famous debate of Tito Stagno with Orlando in the US, whether the spaceship had arrived or not. It took me some time to understand that it was an extraordinary event. When you're too young, either there's some adult leading you, asking you the right questions and telling you what you have to look at, or it's not easy to understand that it was an extraordinary event. Later on, especially in the past 10 or 15 years, I increasingly understood that it is an extraordinary event because now we can fully grasp how important that event was. Paolo, as an astronaut, what were the most surprising and meaningful aspects of that mission? Apollo 11, you mean? Well, there's some things that were very important, but thinking about it today, I was 313 days in space, but some colleagues of mine stayed there for 500, 600, even 800 days. So, well, 8 days of Neil Armstrong, Aldrin, and Michael Collins were not too many, but this is not the case because when somebody does something that nobody else has done before, then it is something pioneer. It is a pioneer adventure. So doing something that no one else has done before is simple in theory compared to a mission on a space station. It seems easier, but when you do it for the first time, it's totally different. So today I see them as the pioneers, and this is a sort of paradox. I just was in a conference with Collins and another one in Basaldrin. Unfortunately, Neil Armstrong died a few years ago, and they looked at me and saying, "You stayed 313 days in space," and I said, "Yes, but you were on the moon, first ones to be on the moon." So it's like. We are the workers, the space workers, whereas they were the pioneers of that time. And we still need to go back there, to go back on the moon, and definitely to go to Mars. This is going to be very important. Scientists, technicians, experts, and the whole country that embarked upon this journey. This is what is really struck me. This mission was launched by Kennedy. And at the beginning, I think that they didn't realize what they were doing. They were very serious. It was about 400,000 people who worked for 10 years, and the investment accounted for 5% of the total federal investment throughout the 10 years. And they were doing something very difficult, full of unforeseen events, full of dangers, and they were very reactive and they were very skillful. Except for Apollo 1, where 3 astronauts were lost, all the missions around the Earth, around the Moon, and then the landings, many things could have gone wrong, but that was not the case. Even Apollo 11 was the result of many corrections, and Apollo 13 showed that it was risky, that journey was risky, and that they had an extraordinary ability to correct based on knowledge, based on team building, based on enthusiasm. They were really very able to overcome difficult, hard obstacles. This is what I think most struck me as an extraordinary event. And I don't know whether that extraordinary event was repeated, because at that time the journey was really an intense one, an intense journey. Paolo. Now, let's focus on that journey and tell us with your eyes and through your experience what has happened, and tell us your experience about living in space. I have some 20 minutes for 450 slides. Now, things are complex. We should make an in-depth analysis when talking about the moon. Here, I'm going to be very quick. So I apologize for that. The human journey in space started in the Second World War. Wars, in the end, generate significant progress from a technological point of view, which is somewhat a paradox. The Germans invented the V1, the V2, and they opened up the doors to space. The Russians grasped this knowledge, and in October 1957, they surprised the world by launching the first satellite. And the United States was puzzled. In 1929, the Americans made the first liquid engine to launch ships. So in 1957, there was this satellite. Everyone was puzzled. And all of a sudden, in 1961, the first human being, the first man, flew in space, Yuri Gagarin. He was from the Soviet Union. And the Americans didn't really know what to say. They had started in 1958 with the Mercury project, then the Gemini project, then the Apollo project. But they didn't really believe in those projects. Things were going wrong. They didn't have enough money. So things were a bit difficult. Until one day in September 1962, the then President of the United States, John Kennedy, surprised the world and the United States too. The one you can see bottom right is the Vice President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. While Kennedy was giving a speech that would change history forever. And he was there without understanding what was going on. And also, all the technicians at that time were starting to work on that. And they thought it was impossible at the beginning because the Soviets had already been in space and they couldn't even send a mouse to space. But John Kennedy held this speech. It was an incredible one where he said, "We have decided to go on the moon this decade and want to do other things, not because they're simple, but because they're difficult." Have you ever heard of a politician saying, we're going to do something because it's difficult? And the result of the landing on the moon would be after its mandate. because this goal will enable us to organize and to test the best of our skills and energy. So he took the challenge because he says this is a challenge that you want to accept, that we don't want to postpone, and that we want to win just like all others. Now let's listen to him. Now, then he went to NASA. He talked to the technicians, and all the technicians thought that he had spoken something before giving this speech, because it was absolutely impossible at that time to be better than the Russians, who had already sent the first man, the first woman, and they couldn't do that. So how would they how would they overcome the Russians? Well, they started to work hard. They started to give the mandate to NASA by providing funds and identifying the strategic objective to win the challenge on behalf of a country, which is something we cannot do today. We cannot have a long-term strategy. We just implement small projects which do not lead to strategic results. Now, these are the badges of the Apollo mission, and usually here you have the names of the astronauts. Out of 200 mission badges, there is a very few badges that do not have the name of the astronaut. And if you look at the one of the Apollo 11, that was the first mission where astronauts actually didn't want to put their names, because they were going on the moon on behalf of mankind. Clearly, there was the eagle representing the United States, but actually, they wanted to represent mankind. And this is something that was felt when they came back to the Earth. It was like we had been, all of us had been on the planet, and not just them. This is when Neil Armstrong went down from the ladder. He didn't know what to expect, so he stopped for a while. And the first words he said was, yes, I'm here, I have stopped, I'm trying to understand what's happening. I've tried to go back to the ladder, and now I'm ready to go down. So he puts his first foot outside the ladder, and he says, it's a sort of dust. And he said the famous sentence, it's a small step for a man, but a giant leap for mankind. And this is what going to space as mankind meant. Many pictures were taken. Like all pictures we have, they were taken by Neil Armstrong on Buzz Aldrin. There's no picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon. The only one is this one, where you can see Neil Armstrong, whose reflection is on Baldwin's face. That's because Neil Armstrong had the camera, and then President Nixon from the United States called. And the president continued to speak. He continued to speak, and soon after the call, they told them, come back inside, time's over. And therefore, Neil Armstrong didn't give his camera to his colleague. So That's why Buzz Aldrin didn't take any pictures of Neil Armstrong. Among all the different pictures, you can see this one. This is a footprint of the boot on the moon. And this is a famous picture. At that time, pictures were taken with non-digital cameras, so it was a bit of a problem to show this picture. It took a lot of time to do that. And we Europeans were not too happy with that because there was we were 7 hours 7 hours after the U.S. Times, and therefore newspapers had to be printed. It was almost night, and therefore the journalists put just a picture that they had in the newspapers. So they put all the materials, they printed all the materials on newspapers. You can see that there was this picture that was taken on television. The first time that social media were used was that one. The Russians never published anything. They just published 2 or 3 days later saying, okay, Yuri Gagarin went to space, but they didn't show the operation when he was going. They just to show what was successful. The Americans, for the first time, used this social media. So this is the first picture of the moon. The moon has been conquered. And this is the Messaggero, another Italian newspaper, showing the first step with the picture of that boot leaving a footprint. But the next day, when the picture arrived, they found out since they didn't have their picture, they went to the beach with the boot of somebody, and they just took a picture. Which very well explains why sometimes there is a fake news. We need to publish something. Is it better not to publish anything, or is it better to publish nothing and then to see what's going to happen? Well, this is interesting. Now, this is me. This is me. I was very nice. Here I was in Cattolica. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to go on the moon. And they told me, okay, just study and then you'll make it. You can do it. Well, but there were very few American astronauts and Russian astronauts and no European ones, so it was not simple. My journey was a long one. It took me many years, and I was selected when I was over 40. It took me a long time. Astronauts used to have used to be more or less 30 years old. I was selected as an astronaut by the European Space Agency when I was over 14. It took me 8 or 9 years before going to space. The first one being in 2007 in order to build the space station. And I was already over 50 years old at that time. I was very lucky because I was selected. Today, the greatest obstacle to go to space is either be selected as an astronaut or being a billionaire in order to buy a flight to go to space. Since 1972, we've no longer been to the moon. That was the last mission, but we're now going to the space station, which is much closer to the Earth, only 400,000 kilometers. On the space station, you can find things that you cannot find on the Earth. Very particular, very peculiar conditions. And this is the reason why we go there, not just because we like it, but because there on the space station, you can do research. You can make experiments which cannot be carried out on Earth, because there are two very important conditions. First of all, you don't feel gravity. The reason why I'm here today sitting with my leg like this, that's because during my last mission, I showed an effect of gravity. And therefore, I broke a foot bone. But actually, there you don't feel gravity. And all the mini forces, which cannot be seen because gravity is like an elephant, but all the mini forces all of a sudden can be measured and appreciated, and we can increase our knowledge. We can really do something great. Then the space station revolves around the Earth 28,000 kilometers an hour, which means 80 kilometers a second. At night, when you finish work, you can go there and look down, and you see the Earth 8 kilometers an hour. If you have an hour time, one and a half hour, you can tour around the world. You can see sunset and dawn. You can see the planet at night, and then during the day you can see the 4 seasons, 5 continents. Well, it's a very nice view, and it gives you a different perspective. So you can carry out experiments which cannot be done on Earth. You can look at the Earth with different eyes as an alien, and I think that will that is the reason why people are interested in going to space as tourists. So in the past, 50 years ago, they went and came back in only 8 days. Today, we go to the space station and we stay there as workforce. There's a center in Houston managing our work, managing our time, so that the staff on the space station can do the largest number of things. As in, it's not that you have to get organized. It's not that you decide what to do in the morning. You are told what to do by the center in Houston. We work about 8.5 hours, 2.5 hours of a gym, and 2 hours of lunch break, then dinner, then you have a rest, you wake up in the morning, and then off again, you start again. From 7:30 at night to 7:30 in the morning, you are free. And there you can go that time of the day, during that time slot, you can sleep, you can go on the social media, you can do what you want. Now, this is a typical working day. That was 1 year ago. You see that there's these red dots telling you where you should be and what you should do. So, a good astronaut, the best astronaut, is the one that can do everything without making mistakes, because any mistake you make, all the time wasted, leads to, has an impact on the rest of the mission. So astronauts are assessed based on your ability to follow what is scheduled. If you're too fast, it's not good, because then things can be harder for the whole mission. So in the space station, the main goal is to increase the knowledge, especially on basic research. Oftentimes, I'm asked 330 days on space, but what have you done in space for me? And I always say, I don't know. I don't know, because doing research is not just like going to the supermarket. I have 10 euro and I go to the supermarket and I buy water, sandwiches, and apples. This is not the case. I mean, research is an investment in the future. It means that funds are allocated to people who can do the job, and in the future could find something that maybe could be useful in 20 years, but maybe. Is that a waste of time, a waste of money? Do we want to have something immediately? This is not the way it's working. institutions investing in research and in the future are those that can last in the long run. The other institutions will die because they've not understood that research is necessary. This is a slide by NASA. In the mission 5152 in 2017, we've made 330 experiments in all the different fields: biotechnologies, earth sciences, education, cultural activities, human research, science, physics, technology. Anything can be done on the space station, but the result is not immediate. To finish off an experiment on the space station, it takes about 2 to 5 years, not just 10 minutes. It's not 1 day or 3 months. Just in order to make the experiment and to get data, it takes 3 to 5 years, and then 1 to 3 years for scientists to process data, and then it takes 3 to 20 years to have results. However, if that investment is not done, no results are there. Have you ever found a gold nugget? A gold nugget? Does it mean that gold nuggets do not exist? No, you've never found them because you've never looked for them. So don't go around now searching for gold nuggets. That means doing bad research. You need to search there where things are, with the right equipment and with the right people. But you don't have to go just by chance. You have to make investments. And if you make long-term investments for a long time with the right equipment and the right people, results will come sooner or later. Doing research is like searching golden nuggets. You hope you're going to find them, but if you don't look for them in the proper way, you will never get anywhere. Therefore, it is absolutely fundamental to continue research, because increasing knowledge means living better in the future and enrich people and the country. I will show you some pictures to show you how people are trained. Astronauts are trained in the space station. You need to be able to do everything. If the toilet has some problems, you have to become a plumber. If somebody gets hurt, there's an engineer who needs to take care of the injury. So we have wonderful equipment. We carry out research on animals. This is research on cancerogenic cells. We study the brain. We study the way flames behave in space. In 2017, we discovered a new category of flames which could increase engine efficiency. This is research on how better to cultivate plants, how to work with telemedicine. In this case, I was carrying out analysis, which today can only be done in 2 hospitals. And I was doing that on my own in the space stations, which means that in the future we will be able to make diagnosis at home rather than getting patients to hospital. These are the problems that you can have when there's no gravity, which can lead to body problems. Educational experiments. These are experiments on fluid and on muscles. We carry out technological experiments by launching satellites. This is another experiment on radiations. This is an experiment on with schools. We talk to them for educational purposes. You wake up in the morning. you can make a genetic experiment and then all of a sudden make research on botanics, and then you do the gym, then you talk to the President of the Republic, and then you can also speak to the Pope, even to the Pope. It's interesting because you can talk to the President of the Republic about research, investments, the importance that Italy is represented in space, and then with the Pope is asking you about God, how is Earth seen from up there? These questions, which are really great, extraordinary, and I have to say, well, I'm just a space engineer, and you don't know what to say. And we invited Pope Francis at the end of this talk with him to come to space with us. To conclude, I'm really very happy that space flight is now opening to tourism, not because we want to have tourists, but because in space, the population could highly contribute. Now there's only technicians in space, and that's a constraint. Think about what a photographer, a poet, a writer, a director could be. He could shoot a film without gravity. Or think about what a sociologist could do in such a different environment. They would enlarge our perspectives, and they would all bring us to space. And this is what we can do in future. So see you on Mars, right?
Fra l'altro,
by the way, on October 26, 2017, when there was this dialogue with the Pope, you were just next to the Pope while Paolo was on the station. And it was, fascinating and charming exchange because there were Russian, American astronauts, and of course Paolo among them. And it was great because the Pope was able to make them feel at ease, and they all answered these questions. But let's go back to the moon. Let's go back to this big event that occurred 50 years ago. So, Roberto, I would like now to ask you something else. Could you please let us better understand the technical, human, cultural, and symbolic value of that event? And also, as a great expert as you are, which are the perspectives for the future? So what is in stock? We've already talked about Mars, so what's beyond? Well, I'd like to start from some remarks on the big lunar enterprise and expedition, the great undertaking of man, to better understand what may be in stock for the future. Apollo 11 and its preparation, but specifically those very special hours of the moon landing, and so the whole process, well, probably was one of those very rare moments when there was such a high level of expectation and sharing at global level. We're talking about 500, 600 million people that looked through the lens of a compact camera outer space. So it's something unique, probably one of the very first compact cameras developed in the world to be able to work even in extreme conditions. And as you know, an image then has such a great evocative power. So this image is so crucial. But let's think about what happened in technical terms. So you need a missile to get to the moon. You need the biggest one ever made by man, Saturn V, that was developed by von Braun, the same who worked with the Germans and then was brought to the US during the last phase of the conflict, and then he ended up as director of the Apollo program for the NASA. So here you see these huge missile. So just the last two teeny weeny parts, the two on top, are those that got around the moon and then just landed. All the rest is just there to propel. So you have propelling fuel, propelling units in order to propel the little part that then can get to the orbit. You need a specific reaction principle, and this is the only way to make the whole process work. So you need to propel and then to release the fuel, let's say, on fire, so the flaming fuel. I would like to compare the technology of that time with what is being made today. You see these patchwork of missiles. Some of them have really existed. Energia, a Russian one. And then you have Falcon Heavy, 70 meters high. And then Yensel, Chinese, 93 meters high. LSS Block 1 is a brand new American missile developed for new lunar missions, 98 meters high. And one that was a project actually never realized, and then Saturn V, 110 meters high. 110 meters, it's a lot. It's so much. And then 140 tons to make move. And then Block 2 cargo, it's a future missile, sort of deriving from the Block 1 that will be in the future. And then BFR. I'm going to tell you more about that at the end of my presentation. These comes from Falcons, and SpaceX is developing that to get to Mars. So the last two are the future. Saturn V is the biggest one. So in the 60s, to get to the moon, so it was done something that over the next 56 years was never done again. So we're trying to now work on these rockets, but that was really unique. Another important thing is that in the minutes while this huge rocket moved, what happened? This rocket burned per second 100 times the fuel needed for a whole flight over the Atlantic, the one made by Lindbergh. During the 6-7 minutes in which the Saturn was propelled into the outer space, so it needed 100 times more the fuel needed by Lindbergh to fly over the Atlantic for the very first time in the history of man. And this is very important. It was extremely advanced technology. It was not easy to do. It's still hard to beat. But often we ask ourselves, which are the returns of such missions? Well, as Nespoli said, so which are the returns of such great missions? Well, the repercussions, so to speak, and the benefits of the Apollo mission were many. First of all, such missions optimize energy consumption. This is a requirement, so you have to minimize mass volume, the quantity of data that you can send per unit of power and fuel used, and usually this then leads to optimization of resources on Earth. And so in this sense, the Apollo program was great. But also there are other products that took inspiration from that. Some of them are surprising. We carry some of them. We would have never, ever existed without such a program. Still today, we consider that for each dollar that is invested today at US level, but also more in general, there is a return on an average between $7 and $8 slash euros in terms of goods. So it is a major advantage. So these investments proved to be extremely beneficial in terms of production capacity and industrial returns. But let's think about this. Computers. Well, computers seem to be something very ordinary, like sandwiches. Well, we do not realize the power of smartphones and computers today. So in 1946, that huge computer that could do fast calculations was not that easy to be used. It could be hosted only in a huge room and required several kilowatts of power. Today, we have such powerful computers, that are the size of a pin. But where was the watershed change? So in integrated circuits that were designed and invented by Jack Kilby, by Texas Instruments, in conjunction with the NASA. And so they developed the first working microcircuit. Texas Instruments, have you ever heard it? Well, Fairchild and Intel, that maybe you know better, well, come from that kind of need. And then Mr. Kilby got the Nobel Prize for this great development and discovery, but certainly, well, the economic and functional returns of such an invention are today's in everybody's pockets. But then there was a time when a computer could fill a whole room. And what about the moon boots? Well, I guess many of you have used them at least once in their lives. So let's think about the boots worn by the astronauts on the moon, and that's where the inspiration come from. Al Gross was an engineer belonging to the Apollo program, and he used his skills to design the sole of the very first authentic moon boot, and not the fake one published by the Messaggero. And it used the DuPont rubber that was pretty unique because it had a special features so that it could keep the same shape, and there was an extrusion process that made it adapt to the level of force. So that's why moon boots are so comfortable, because the foot pressure is perfectly adapted to this rubber sole that has this specific feature of adapting to the pressure made by the foot on its different parts. And this technology was so successful. And then astronauts were covered in a special fabric. Well, the overall of astronauts is great because it can keep a perfect temperature and pressure. With a perfect temperature, but out, well, there is vacuum and, other extremely hot, scorching hot, or extremely cold. And this is something quite unique. The fabric is unique, and they are so resistant to wearing, to extreme temperatures, and then it was used to cover stadiums. This is the Houston Stadium, and it is covered, so the roof is made with this kind of fabric that is more resistant than steel, is transparent, and it has thermal properties so that it let light go through, and so the grass can grow. And it is also used for many civil engineering applications and comes from space research. And then, have you ever seen air cushions? And air cushions are a great solution, letting people move things that are very heavy. And that was another technology used to move around the big, huge, heavy, and bulky things necessary to prepare the rockets on the launching ramp. And then security systems. we have a specific technology that was developed to create special anti-intruder systems so that they were then used for other purposes. Solar panels. This is a beautiful picture of the spatial home where Paolo spent the vast majority of his 313 days. Well, shows these huge solar panels of the spacious station. Well, to get to outer space and stay there, you need to use solar power to produce electric power. And so, again, solar cells were developed for that first. And then we have specific antibacterial purification systems that were developed by using silver microparticles that let you sort of disinfect without chlorine clothes or other things. And then stability techniques using vibrations, because these are extremely sort of vibrating situations, and this mechanical vibration can bring about a lot of sort of stress. So this is an anti-earthquake test. So you make simulations to let them vibrate to see if they resist to the force of the earthquake. Well, here you certainly guess what it is. It is a pacemaker, and a pacemaker technology, pacemaker, not spacemaker, well, is a technology that you certainly know, and you certainly, well, I didn't have to explain you how important this technology is. Millions of people can live thanks to this. And then we have technologies to cool clothes with the water-based cooling systems come from space research. They are used for Formula One drivers, but also for firemen, so for any application where there is a very high temperature. And what about this? Well, you see, this is a tool to, just screw, unscrew, make holes. So this is a drill. So it is very important to have tools that work without a wire. So you see, it's wireless, but also then there are specific applications, and also they are made so that they give stability to the hand and the arm. So this is a special drill, the one held by the astronaut, that once switched on doesn't provoke that sort of counter movement reaction. So the arm and the hand remain stable. And then this is a watch, a wrist watch. So in terms of reliability and speed of quartz watches comes directly from lunar applications, because reliable time measuring tools were needed. Or the blanket, you see, these emergency blankets that let you sort of get warm, and they're so thin. And these very same blankets were used to cover different parts of the stations and also of the units that were sent to outer space. And then let's not forget other things. So that was just a brief overview. And believe me, it was a very brief overview. There's such a long list of things. I mean, the NAA and ASA has a huge database, including all the things that come from space research. And so you now perfectly understood to what extent the benefits of such research overarch very long periods, at least 50 years and even more. What about the future? It is rather interesting to see that the Apollo program was developed in a world exposed to a high level of political tension. So we are talking about the sort of competition that was underway between the Russians, the Americans, Sputnik, first man, first woman in the space, and then Kennedy's speech, and then they somehow sort of overachieve the Russians. So that was a competition based on civil applications. Why do I underscore that? Those were special years. Sputnik, and then April 28th, 58. So the UK becomes a nuclear power. And then a few years after the Sputnik, still 58, we have the American Space Agency that is created to compete with the Russians. And then in 59, Castro enters the Havana. In 1960, maybe few remember this, we have nuclear missiles located in Apulia region in the south of Italy for a few months, and then they're removed. Well, Berlin Wall, 1961. So the world is not a peaceful place at all. I mean, you see there's a lot of tension going on and growing all over the world. And then you have these JFK speech at the Rice University in Houston. And specifically, you would never ever expect such a speech within that framework. Well, in the following years, twice Kennedy proposes the Soviets to go together to the moon. He made it once at the UN in front of all the representation of the countries of the world, and another time, a second time, he proposed the Russians, the Soviets, this kind of undertaking, but they did not accept it. He proposed them to get to the moon together. But you see, outer space still has some sort of extraterrestrial dimension, not only because it's out of the planet, but also because international cooperation, even between, let's say, countries that are not friendly with each other, has such a strong meaning. Kennedy never saw his dream come true. He was murdered on November 22, 1963. So unfortunately, he could not see it. But his message and his vision, well, have been fully implemented, because we know that we have been to the moon 6 times. And so the enthusiasm we are talking about was great. Well, at that time, it was a global passion, and global passions do not last long. Well, how many times do you, how many of you remember the astronauts of the Apollo 12? Well, probably not many of you. Well, he flew 3 months after Apollo 11. Apollo 13, you remember that because there was an extraordinary event and the film was made after that. But what about 13, 14, 15, 17? Well, these Apollos, 14, 15, 16, 17, were quickly forgotten. So the public opinion quickly forgot them. So the world was somehow burning with plenty of problems. So one take-home message is the following. Apollo has represented the climax, a magic moment. It may sound inappropriate as a term, but it was really a big moment of sharing, because yes, the Americans landed on the moon, but in terms of admiration, of wonder, the feeling of greatness for humankind was shared for 1 second, 1 minute a day, was shared by the whole population of the world. And then everybody went back to the normal, so to speak. Well, what about today? Are we still able to somehow get to the space with the same spirit? Well, people are still fascinated by this spatial challenge today. As nations, as people, maybe we do not have the same level of passion, so maybe we're not able to take up these challenges in the same way. And these are not challenges against, but to reach out to something, for something. So why is it so? Maybe we have already been there, or we do not have the same level of ambition. I don't know. In order to find that passion and enthusiasm again is possible, because we are hungry not just of bread, but also of something else. And discovering, finding out solving a problem in a new way. This is something that makes our life worth living. And stamina is not just related to physical exercise of the muscles, but also of the brain. And this is very interesting to say so here, because if you train your brain, you can achieve very ambitious goals. And this is a really stimulating space, a really stimulating situation and scenario. Our sort of desire and ambition to carry out such undertakings is something that is inside us. Well, the space is for the few that can get there, but also for everybody, because it's a challenge that covers several sectors. There are so many problems to be solved, so it's a longing ideal for generalized problem-solving attitudes that can go to the benefit of the whole world and the whole humankind. But let's have a look at the future. So the moon remains there in front of us, and then Mars is farther away. Mars is like a magnet. It attracts our imagination, well, since Schiaparelli's time. Do you remember the misunderstanding between Schiaparelli and Lowell? There was a sort of a translation, a bad translation of some remarks that led to the sort of understanding that there are creatures that are called Martians. Well, Mars is very, very far away, and so you need to develop new techniques to get there. 60 times the man has tried to get there. All Russians' attempts failed. The Americans have tried, and sometimes they have landed with these beautiful rovers. So again, it's a tricky mission. The Europeans were able to send their Max Express in 2003, a probe, and that discovered liquid water under the surface of Mars. And in 2016, with ExoMars, and we were able to launch a satellite capturing images of the planet, and we tried also to land. And this is the probe that approached correctly, but over the last few kilometers ended up under control because of a software problem. In 2020, we are going to have the second part of the ExoMars mission. It's very interesting because the goal is to bring there on the planet a rover equipped with a drill that will drill the surface deep down. We know that there is some ice, and it's a trace of the old Martian water, and probably there are also areas with a mixture of water and dust. So these sort of samples could be very interesting to be analyzed in order to see if there are traces of past life. What about Mars and the future? So these cost 10, 15 times as the International Space Station, ISS, so it requires a lot of resources and time and energy, so it will get some more time. There are now two basic modes to cope with the mission. Yes, I will skip this. I don't want to dwell too much. There are two ways. You have the American Spatial Agency that proposes missions with intermediate phases to, in the meantime, develop the required technology to make real men land one day on Mars. And then there is the approach by this gentleman, who he's developing the Big Falcon rocket, the BFR, the biggest rocket on the first slide, as I showed you, to be able to get there himself with a group of friends to colonize the red planet. And, well, of course, this is an initiative based on private investment. And so that would, well, this is an example of the private world leading such an experiment. Who is going to make it? I mean, who is going to conquer Mars? Well, the American spatial agencies is talking about 20, 30 years necessary. Elon Musk wants to do it over the next 4 to 6 years. I don't know. Well, it's a big question mark. Well, Elon Musk has done a couple of important things. Seismetics, Tesla, some specifically powerful batteries. So this is a reality, and well, the American Space Agency is also very competent and skilled. Well, these are two different and completely different entities. So we are going to see what's going to happen next. Thank you very much for your patience and attention.
Bene, grazie. No,
Thank you. I want to ask one last question. Here we're talking about very important adventures which have been of the utmost importance for mankind. And we're talking about this because these adventures have been successful. But this is not always the case. As already said, space is risky. It is a world where there's different complex factors to be considered, where rigor, training, stubbornness, and the long run are absolutely key, which is not very common and popular in our culture. These projects take a very long time, even decades, whereas we are mostly used to thinking in terms of seconds and minutes. So it takes decades with thousands of dedicated people who want to achieve the same goal. That requires very strong motivation. So I'm going to ask a personal question here, because you are working in a sector characterized by these features. So the question is the following. Where can you find your motivation even when things often go wrong, as is often the case? Where can you find the energy that sometimes you don't have? Because this is a sign of a strong passion. Where does it come from? Apparently, it is a simple question, but it's difficult. Now, I'm going back to the idea that I'm a space engineer. So when you start talking about the meaning of human beings, I'm scratching my head. So when things are difficult and you have to do that, you have to start doing something you are interested in, you are passionate about. What is passion? To me, it's something I have inside, making me do something because I want to do it. Oftentimes today, we do something because it gives us money, fame, immediate return, and we fail because we're not able, or we're not stubborn enough to overcome disappointments and mistakes. Everyone can do easy things. It is what is impossible in impossible dreams that are hard to achieve. And to me, you really need to have a very strong passion. I was able to fly in space when I was 50, when some astronauts retire, and it was not very easy. It took me many tests, many applications. I wasn't taken the first time, not even the second time. Then I was not selected for the flight. So at the end, there is this stubbornness, which to me it comes out of passion, because this is what I really want to do. So sometimes during my presentations, one of the questions I'm often asked is, how much is your salary? What's your salary? How much do you get paid? I don't understand the meaning of these questions. Sometimes people ask me, but are astronauts rich? Otherwise, I wouldn't do that. Otherwise, I would never embark upon this journey. People want to be rich and famous. But this is not the real reason behind it. The real reason behind it is that you do something because you really want to do it, because you're passionate about it. And if you do something with passion, you can do the extra mile. You can take a step when you're no longer able to walk. So learning from your mistakes is key. In our culture, when you make a mistake, you just look around to make sure that no one has seen you. But we have to know that learning by mistakes is of primary importance. It's not very often. It's not the person that makes the mistakes, but it's the system making the person making mistakes. So the person has to understand why the mistake happened, and sometimes the person who has made the mistake is somebody that is able to find something new. And we need to learn that, and the society as a whole should learn to find passions. Even in the easiest of things, even when you work as a hairdresser or a taxi driver. The other day I was at a conference in a school, and there was a 12-year-old girl who told me, hello, what's your name? Okay. And then I asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, an ice maker. And everybody laughed at that. But making the ice maker and become a worldwide famous ice maker could make somebody earn tons of money. So basically, what I mean is that you start to work based on your passions, based on what you really want to do. This is the strongest motivation of all. I want to go back to Kennedy's speech. That speech made by a politician is much more important than a speech made by anyone, because that led to something. So he wanted to make something difficult because it was important to do it. So this is something that the society should do even when the society is well, and not just at a time of crisis, because we know that when you don't have any problems, when there's no difficulty at all, you set easier goals. And this is very often the case. And it should be the other way around. Otherwise, a catastrophe, not disasters should be needed in order to do something. And then, to me, passion is somewhat different compared to what Paolo said. Before passion, there must be curiosity. There's a goal. There's something that wakes up in the morning to achieve some results. It can be anything. People who want to go to space, people who want to become scientists, people who want to discover how to make a better ice cream. So it is the curiosity, which is our own human characteristic compared to any other species, which is the engine of all, and it is there in our brain, in our head. And we need to spur that, because curiosity can also be destroyed. We human beings are very sensitive to the social context. And if we live in social context that can arouse curiosity and build on that, we can forget about it. And to me, with the help of education, training, examples, with the help of adults, if curiosity can be transformed into passion, then every individual can achieve objectives where sacrifice and suffering are somewhat something to be neglected. So, how much suffering can we bear? Well, we don't know. It depends on how strong our passion, motivation, curiosity, and objective are. And we are very flexible in that. To me, education and training in families and schools should excite children who can still have a curious look, a sparkling gaze in their eyes, even when they grow up. If that sparkle disappears, someone would stop at the first obstacle. So we started by recalling the mesmerized look of the prehistoric man looking at the moon. And now we're living at a time where we realize that our look has changed. We're much more aware of living on this planet and of living in the world surrounding us. There's a sentence by Neil Armstrong summarizing that event of 50 years ago. The most important thing of the Apollo mission, Armstrong wrote, was to show that mankind is not just chained to one single planet, because our vision can go beyond that border, and our opportunities are unlimited. And maybe unlimited is not true, but certainly it's unlimited in our imagination. Who could have imagined today's dialogue 200 years ago? It would have been impossible. What is most striking is that still today, the starting point for a journey, for a further step forward towards knowledge and conquest is the same gaze and astonished look of the prehistoric man watching the moon. And that is the sparkle setting off curiosity and passion, which enable us to define a goal and to establish collaboration with others, because altogether we can better enjoy reality and knowledge of reality. And it's this it is this wonder underlying our reasoning, our thinking, and enabling us to establish deep relations with whatever is surrounding us until we can find out the meaning of things, what make them beautiful and useful for us and for the mankind as a whole. So I warmly thank you for today's debate. There's just three final pieces of information. First and foremost, among the distinguished authorities who are present in the audience, I would like to send my greetings to Father Carollo. And there's a reason why I'm saying that. He let us know that during the 100 years of the beatification of the Saint Mary of Loreto, who cherishes all the astronauts, Pope Francis gave the Jubilee Lauretanum for all the people involved in civil and military spaceship, and for those who will arrive in Loreto from any part of the world. So we are all embraced by what Pope Francis has said. He has paid attention to the world going beyond the Earth orbit. A second notice is very important. We are drawing to the end of this year's meeting, and it is not too late to give your support by donating to the meeting. It doesn't matter how much you want to contribute, but your support is one of those big goals that we mentioned. In this meeting, many people felt that they are part of this game, and a donation is a very simple gesture that can contribute to the meeting. So please donate now at the desks where you see the red heart and with the sign Dona Ora, donate now. Last but not least, for those of you who would like to ask a question to Paolo and Roberto, since there's going to be another event in B2, in the nearby area, there is a space where you can continue talking to them while going away and going away from the hall very fast and steadily. Thank you.